Hey, everybody. I'm here with my friend, Bobby Watkins. And Bobby was a longtime member at our church and really faithful part of our congregation until he moved away to Spokane to lead music at a church up there, which is right about the time I started working at Creekside. So I don't know if I should be offended, Bobby.
It's
Uh,
probably why we left. No, no,
Yeah, it
no.
was all me. It was all me, right? And so he moved to Spokane, led music up there, and has spent a long while now mainly doing ministry in Ukraine. And so that's my intro. And I'll just ask Bobby, can you tell us about your experience and involvement with Ukraine and the ministry you've done there specifically?
Be happy to, Chad. Well, it was for us. I never wanted to go to begin with. Not something I wanted to do. But we first started going to Eastern Europe in 1999, a long time before we left Creekside, and went to Poland twice. But then, starting in 2008, actually 2007, Sharon went with a group to Ukraine. Beginning 2008, we were going each year with Michael Gott, who is a Southern Baptist evangelist who has had ministry in Eastern Europe since the collapse of the Soviet Union heavily. And even before that, he was getting in when he could behind the Iron Curtain for ministry. But as partners with Michael and Jan Gott, we started going to Ukraine in 2008 for me and went each year um, to do 2 week English evangelism events. And then in 2011, God moved in my life while we were in Yalta in Crimea to come back to Spokane, quit my church position, and pretty much devote every year since 2011 to ministry in Ukraine, Hungary, and Poland, but mostly Ukraine. And so that's made about 30 trips since 2008 for me.
Wow, how long do you stay on those trips?
Normally, we would go for anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. But once Sharon, my wife, and many of you know Sharon, once she retired in 2016, we started going only about 3 times a year, but staying about 6 weeks at a time.
Okay.
And so we cut down the number of trips, but we're staying longer, a month to 6 weeks, most of the time these past few years.
I know this isn't on the script, but evangelism can be a broad term. So what specifically, what work are you doing when you're there?
Well, when we first started going, when we surrendered to go in 2011, we were only going with Michael Gott's organization, and Michael would do 2 week English schools, teaching conversational English, and then sharing the gospel. And the benefit was going for 2 weeks, we developed relationships with students so that they wanted to know why we were the way we were. And so then we were able to share our relationship with Jesus Christ. But I will say, when we started going in 11, God opened the doors for so much more beyond these evangelism events. Sharon, my wife, was a vision instructor there in Willamette Valley for the 10 years we lived in the Wilsonville area. And when we came back to Spokane, and she retired from vision in public schools, and she has been involved with a ministry to the blind in Ukraine. And God opened the doors for me to be involved with the seminary in Western Ukraine, teaching first year worship students each year since 2014.
Great, thank you. That's amazing. And so some of that is why I wanted to talk to you today, and kind of at the heart of this conversation for me is that we know that there's a war, and we read articles, watch videos about the conflict, but I mean, maybe the rest of my church and the people who will watch this are a lot smarter than me. But I want to first just know. I guess I want to know kind of about the church situation there, and I thought you were a unique guy to ask about that. But before that, even, I mean, can you tell us how we can specifically pray? Like, I know that's a big question, but from your perspective, and it's a more clear perspective than most of us have, like, how should Christians be praying for what's going on over there?
Well, of course, The greatest prayers that perhaps God through his grace and mercy would bring this to a stop because of the thousands of people that are suffering. But we know God has a plan. Um, I see so many people that are in fear, so much fear, and there's a lot of money flowing into Ukraine to help people in escaping, but there are some places where they're cut off now from food and water and supplies, and so it's a desperate situation for many. And so I guess the greatest prayer would be that God would wrap his arms around these people and give them a peace and a hope that only he can give, and that he would deliver them uh, from the situation and give them a way of escape. But that's our earthly and fleshly desire for them, and we know God has a different plan. Perhaps he does, but just pray for especially for believers, that they would not lose their faith and their hope.
So as you say that, like, is there any way that we can, besides prayer? I think prayer's the number one thing, but is there any way we can actually help? I mean, you said money's flowing in, and we see obviously ways to raise money comes across social media pretty
Right,
consistently,
right.
but and maybe the answer is just simply no. But is there like anything that Christians here can do to help?
Well, as far as contributing to those sorts of needs that are there, Michael Gott that I mentioned, who we've gone with, Michael and Jan, his wife. Michael is 79 now and still totally sold out to Ukraine. Michael and his wife, I think even if not today, tomorrow, are on their way, flying to Poland and then going. They've already arranged ground transport to get back into Ukraine, and they are taking $250,000 in relief funds
Mm.
along with them. Michael has, if someone's looking, I want to give to a ministry. If you look at a financial type thing, I can recommend you look at their website, which is mgi.global. And when you want to give, there'll be if you wanted to give to Ukraine support, on their drop down, there's a tab that will come up through PayPal. People could give to this Ukraine ministry fund. So that's the one organization that I fully support and believe. If you're looking for a financial way, I've been amazed that God has still allowed us in the midst of this war to still transfer electronically funds to people. That's one thing I thought would disappear quickly, and still so far today we're still in communication with many people that are well into an area of fighting. So mgi.global, if you want to investigate a Christian ministry that you could trust to deliver needed funds to Ukraine, I would recommend that one.
That's great. We'll link that in the comments wherever we put this. And if we play it at church, we won't, but mgi.global.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So, question that I think you have unique insight into probably is, how are the Ukrainian churches in Ukraine responding to the conflict? Do you have any stories you can tell us about that?
Well, I don't have too many unique stories at this point, but I do know that the church is active and working. We have one church I'll tell you about. The city of Denipro is a city that I am very surprised that has not yet been heavily bombarded, because Dnipro is on the Dnieper River, and it is it's down south and east of Kiev, toward what has already been a war zone, only about 2 hours from the war zone of these last 8 years. Dnieper's about 1 million people. Uh, it's a very valued city to Russia. And so far, though, they have not had a lot of heavy bombardment. And I was looking at a post on Instagram today, a video that the church had made, where this church is full of people that are come out of Mariupol and other points east, refugees. That church is full of people that they're feeding them and they're ministering to them. So I do know that the church has not run scared. They're continuing their ministries. I do not know. I'm sure there are some places where they've been heavily bombed, that they are not actively able to uh, carry on this type of ministry. But so far, God has spared Dnipro uh, from heavy bombardment. And that church, Pastor Sergey, there's an amazing man. And I was looking at their video, and they are full, and they are actively serving. And here's a pastor serving, uh, and it's just him now. His son is at war. His wife and his daughters are out of the country. So, in many cases, the women and children have left, but our pastors stay behind and they serve him.
That's powerful. Are you able to talk to your friends and contacts there through social media and things like that, or is that just something that's not possible?
Well, I'm surprised, but it is still possible. I talked with a 17-year-old young man in Western Ukraine yesterday for a short time, and they instituted a law so that men 18 to 60 cannot leave the country. Uh, this young man, Rostic, is 17, and he was saying, "I don't ever want to turn 18."
Hmm.
He said, "I always want to be 17." He's normal. He doesn't want
Yeah,
to be off at war, but we are, and it has surprised me. We have not, other than this one young man, we have not attempted video chats,
right.
but I feel we probably could because most of the time, except for Mariupol, and Sharon has several friends right now in Mariupol, which is one of the worst places to be, I think, right now, and has not been able to have communication with them. But there's a young woman in Kiev that we have been communicating with. Has just been searching for something to eat. She found milk and eggs and has some cereal, but communication is still ongoing. I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I'm thankful for that too. I'm surprised by that actually,
I
and
am. I am.
amazed. So yeah, that's
Right.
fantastic. What is the kind of spiritual state of Ukraine before this? Just to back up, it just popped
Okay.
into my head now. But yeah, well, I mean, is it a largely Christian nation? Is that, if it is that just kind of in name, like it can feel like in the U.S. sometimes, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it was surprising to me when I first went to Ukraine. I thought part of Soviet Union for 70 years, communist, where the church heavily persecuted and shut down. But Ukraine has a very rich cultural heritage of Orthodox Christianity. I mean, everywhere you look, there's symbolism of the Christian faith, and back around near around the year 1000, Christianity. There's a large statue overlooking the Dnieper River in Ukraine, in Kiev, that commemorates the baptism and Ukraine becoming a Christian nation.
Mm.
So, but sadly, yes, the Orthodox Church is very strong, but it's cultural, and I think the great majority of these Orthodox Christians do not really know Christ. Um, the evangelical church has been it's a field, it's a harvest. I mean, many people are coming to Christ when they're truly hearing the gospel, but it would be considered a very religious Christian country, but like I say, strongly Orthodox Christianity, where many really don't know Christ.
I told our congregation, you can tell me if this is just weird that I've had these experiences, but often it seems like growing up in the Willamette Valley that I'll meet somebody who speaks Russian, and then I say, "Oh, you're Russian" or whatever, and it feels like they always say back to me, "I'm actually Ukrainian." And then that's followed by me saying, "Oh, what generation are you? How long has your family been here?" And they always, it feels like this is the story. My grandpa came here. He was a
Right.
pastor that was persecuted for his faith. Is that like weird that that's always the story for me, or is that like did a lot of were there a lot of people who came to America, during you know the Soviet kind of Union's time that were just fleeing persecution?
Well, from my understanding, and I truly believe your story is probably more common than we might think. To my understanding, about the time the Soviet Union collapsed in '91, when Ukraine had its freedom. Even though freedom was down there, there were a large number of Ukrainian Christians granted asylum in America due to religious persecution. I can think of a man in our church who they came here, 20 plus years ago. Father was a youth pastor who was killed by the government. So it's probably a pretty common story, especially of those that have been in the States that came in the early 90s. Most of them came on religious persecution visas. So that's common. And yet now today, until this war, there's much more religious freedom has been in Ukraine than even here in the U.S. I mean, to share the gospel in the public schools, go to it.
Hmm.
Wide open and has less restrictions to the gospel than we have here.
Interesting. Okay, last questions. If you could tell, last question, singular. If you could tell Christians anything about what's going on in Ukraine, what would it be? And I know that'll come from an evangelistic heart, but what would you tell us, our church specifically, and Christians in general?
Well, I've heard it from at least two or three Ukrainians, and I believe this is true. That this is so much more than a political war; it is a spiritual war. Uh, I think we're seeing a country where Christ has been moving in a powerful way. I mean, the gospel has had the freedom to spread. Hundreds and hundreds of people have come to Christ in recent years, and so I think many of them believe, and I do too, that we're not just seeing a geopolitical situation. We're seeing a war between Satan and God's people. And so it's one of those things where those of us that believe we're getting toward the end of time before the Lord's return and the rapture of the church would say, well, we can start to see how things are fitting into place. But these are a people that love their country and that will die for their country. And so as we look at this, don't look at it just as a political battle, but realize that it is a war for spiritual lightness and light and dark. And the the church is strong there. The church is fighting. The church is standing up, and God's going to draw people to Him through this. As I was talking to my closest friend there is a young pastor, and he's more like a son to me. He was saying, "Yeah, we will win this," and I believe Ukraine is going to win this, but at a great, 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 great cost.
Mm.
So we're trusting the Lord to have His will in the lives of people, and a lot of tears being shed. It's almost like living there. So that's our situation, though, at this point.